This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gulo.
I'm Nate Blayton.
I'm David McDonald.
And I'm Sam Merciers.
And this week on the show, we've got some news stories for you, we've got a discussion for you, and we're going to start with what I would spend my £20,000 sterling on had I £20,000 to spend, and that is an original copy of the score to Pierre Boulez's Structure 1A, which is a really cool piece. If you took any classes in music of the 20th century in college, this would be a work that you would have studied. It certainly features prominently in Alex Ross's The Rest Is Noise, and it is kind of one of the ultimate expressions of total serialism, where the pitch and other musical elements are also serialized and systematized. Really, really cool piece, and it is going up for auction at Sotheby's. Actually, just later this week, as we're recording this on May 28th, 2015. So, get thee to Sotheby's, and if you're wanting to buy me a gift, I like a nice walnut frame around my original handwritten Boulez scores. So I don't know. Do you guys think this is interesting at all? That it's interesting to me that we have these scores that are going up for auction almost in the same way that art goes up for auction. It's actually sharing, the auction with some pretty significant paintings and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I always think it's weird that we talk about how much money these things are worth, but I mean, I guess they're worth it to somebody. I don't know.
They are worth it. There's no arguing that if somebody will spend that money on it, then that's what it's worth.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe, and certainly we're contributing to this, but to talk about the dollar value of a score like it's a baseball score is weird to me, and it gets a lot of attention. Especially now, here's what's really weird is we're not even talking about the work of art. Right? When you're talking about a painting, you're actually transferring the article. Like the thing is the main object, and I'm holding up a pad of paper as though it is a painting. But for those of you listening to the audio version, which is everybody, that seems silly to me for a score where the score is not even the piece of music, right? The score is just like the thing that Boulez wrote down so somebody else could make the piece of music, right? And
yeah, it's like paying a bunch of money for a printout of the code of a program rather than getting the program itself.
But it's the handwritten code from the programmer's own hand.
Yeah. Well, I think it's
more of a historical artifact, I guess. It's not
yeah, that's why people are interested.
When you have people over, you can say, "Hey, look at this thing I got."
Yeah.
That's how I would describe it if I had the Structures 1A on my wall.
Yeah.
Look at this thing I got.
Yeah.
Actually, I wouldn't even put it on my wall. Just be in a file drawer.
Boulez has somewhere. Among composers that wrote that brand of music, Boulez is really well known because of his conducting career. So he's got that going for him
a lot of them
as far as increasing the dollar value.
Sure. And what a provocative guy he was too. I think that adds to the story if you were to get one of those scores.
That's true. That's like always
sorry, he still is a provocative guy, I should say.
Well, it's one of those silly kind of things when you read about an art auction, everybody gets all hot and bothered about the provenance of the artwork, and this has quite a provenance, so that's neat. And this is a work from 1951.
I actually don't like that work. I like it. I like looking at it, but man, I'm not a fan of the listening like you are.
I like the same year that Music of Changes came out by John Cage, and one generated by chance operations.
So Sam sounds like he's having some technical issues, but he's talking about the difference between Cage and Boulez and how the surface of them doesn't sound that different, even though they have such distinctly opposite, generative techniques associated with them. Sam, are you back?
Yes, I think.
Did I summarize your point adequately?
I didn't hear. Were you talking about music of changes and structures 1A?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yes, I'm sure you did.
Okay, and it's a really interesting kind of juxtaposition between those two things that have a relatively similar surface sound and such different techniques used to create them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and ultimately after the same thing, like the abdication of ego and self in the compositional process, one through a process and one through chance.
I actually had a student send me an email just last week saying that he doesn't understand why so many composers just don't understand theory. Like he's like 20 years old talking about people who aren't writing things that are structured the way he expects them to be structured based on his understanding of a 20th century theory course.
You made him sound like a 20-year-old Milton Babbitt.
Maybe that's who he is.
Ask him
What's
if
his hairline like?
I don't know.
Ask him if he teaches lessons, because I could use some help.
Yeah,
I don't understand either. So.
working on it.
Yeah.
Another really interesting anniversary. We've got two really interesting anniversaries that are going to factor into these next two stories. One of them is that the AACM is turning 50 this month, and that is very, very exciting. They are an organization. If you're not familiar, this is the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, which is the name always gets buried. I just always know of them as AACM. And
as opposed to the musicians who aren't creative.
Yeah.
Right. I think they're.
Hey, I've met those people.
Yeah, I think I've actually had those people in class. I've maybe even taken some classes from those people.
Yes.
But they get left out of a lot of discussions of contemporary music, and I'm not sure why. I've got some ideas. First of all, they're not based in New York. They're based in Chicago. And second of all, they do a lot of improvisation, and a lot of what they do is not written down, though they have had some fantastic composers working with them, and of course from this same group we get George Lewis, who's a pretty astonishingly talented composer, won a Pulitzer in the 90s, and I don't know, for whatever reason, I think these guys aren't given the same position in history of American music as people like John Cage that we were mentioning earlier, and I think they go in that category. Maybe I'm overselling them. But they turned 50 this week, and they've been doing some celebrations. You can find some links to media of some stuff that they've been doing, that other people have been doing in honor of them. I Care If You Listen had one of their great kind of short 5-question profiles of George Lewis this week. Lewis himself was actually the cover feature story in a recent issue of the I Care If You Listen magazine. What were you going to say, Sam?
Well, I was just going to say I agree that I think it's a combination of doing avant-garde, which has trouble, gaining speed or gaining steam. Third Coast problems, being out of Chicago. I think it's those two things. And when you have improvisation, there's nothing to worship afterwards, It happens, and it's more of a site-specific thing, and there's no score that you can then sell years later for €20,000.
Right. Impossible to analyze because
it doesn't manufacture the kinds of artifacts that we want out of our classical, proper classical music.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Well, we would encourage people to check out, if you're hearing this and you're not familiar with AACM, definitely do it. Spend some time listening and or watching to media you can find there, and there's plenty on the web. So they are, I think, deserving of a place in American music history that we usually reserve for pretty prominent composers like Cage, and I think they go there too.
Might we try and get somebody from AACM on the show?
We should work on that. We should work on that.
Like a good idea.
Sam, I assign you that job.
All right, I'm on top of it.
I just see what I did there. You came up with an idea, and then so I made it your job to execute.
Assuming that my computer lives long enough to do that kind of thing.
Right, and assuming that I have the authority to ask you to do anything.
Right.
So another anniversary. Sam was pointing out before the show that we have all of these anniversaries that are really just the product of using a base 10 number system that really nobody is completely arbitrary. And we've got another one. John Cage turned 100. He actually turned 100 last year. But a really interesting website just this last week from the New World Symphony, who's been doing some amazing web media stuff over the last couple of years, called Making the Right Choices. And it's got video of a lot of the performances and some really interesting interactive stuff and some great resources for reading, watching, and listening. A new site called Making the Right Choices, and it's at nws.edu/John Cage. And it's just this is a really beautiful presentation of some really great media about Cage, which is why I was continuing to mention him in the context of AACM earlier. Have you spent any time with this stuff, Patrick?
I've been to the site. I think it actually came out maybe a couple weeks ago, but I haven't been involved with any of it. But it's a really neat site that they've kind of put together there. The New World site is really something.
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't seen any performances in their performance space at the New World Center, it's a really astonishingly beautiful place, and a lot of the videos on this site are from their hall, which is really cool. There's lots of really cool things with projections.
I've actually never been to the New World Center before, but you have, right?
I have been. I've been there a few times. It's a little bit of a hike, but it's worth it for stuff like this. And it's really beautiful.
It's cool that you get to see all these videos of Cage pieces being performed, because even the pieces that don't have any sort of overtly stated visual component, any Cage piece, or just about any Cage piece, is going to be pretty interesting to see, because there's going to be something that's not your average new music recital fare happening. You know, there's going to be a guy with a water can or something, and then New World on top of that is doing cool visual stuff, you know, of their own to go along with it.
Yeah, so much of the way they present everything is visual in that space.
And that's kind of their standard operating procedure. But very cool when coupled with somebody's music who just seems to beg to be treated that way also.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just hearing the music, you might not know that those little plucks are from a cactus with a feather, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. That's a great example, right? Because if you didn't hear those, there's nothing about that sound that sounds like a cactus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but when you watch a person, you know, put their hands, because you get this, there's like an impending sense of like, oh no, he's about to grab a cactus, you know. Yeah, I mean that there's no way for that not to color the way you hear those noises that then happen.
Like preemptively shouting at a child, like, no, don't touch that. No, don't put that in your mouth.
Yes, absolutely. So we have a discussion topic.
Yeah, we don't have a guest this week, so we're filling with the discussion.
We're filling with this a discussion topic.
Discussion.
And Advice from Strangers is a series of blog posts on the New Music Box site. The one that we're going to talk today, I think, is third in the series. It's Advice from Strangers, and then it'll have a different title after that. This one's called The Craft of Community. The intention of the blog, it's actually kind of interesting. Advice from Strangers explores shared challenges in the industries of new music and technology, which that is an opening gambit. I mean, as sort of like the template that we're working on is an interesting thing to me. The idea of the craft of community is something, I mean, anyone who's tried to advocate for the new music world in any way has used the word community or talked about community, even if they're not really behind it. I personally think it's a big deal, but I wanted to kind of bounce ideas off of you guys and see what we can come up with. Like the opening salvo in this article is community versus group. In other words, getting at the idea there's a difference between a community and a group, and it has to do with the connections that are made and what they do for people and how they're established and how they're maintained. Basic idea, the basic thesis there being that a community is something that where it's useful going back and forth amongst its members. Then puts forth the idea that you need to nurture connections that you make, and we all know that, like most often put in simplest terms as networking.
Right.
But you need to network. And then the next giant bold-faced heading is find a juicy juxtaposition, and this is the first point that was really interesting to me. Sir Ken Robinson, talking on creativity in his, I guess you might say, famous TED Talk, said that the most creative experiences come from thinking about something in a different way, and the idea coming from collaborating with someone from a different domain. In other words, when you mix your domain with someone else's domain, it's going to force you to think about your work in a new and possibly creative way. And to me, this is kind of what that's getting at. Find a juicy juxtaposition. In other words, creating a community isn't just among people who are absolute new music lovers. It's trying to get people who are interested in art for art's sake, and not just the hardcore new music people, but people who enjoy art and want to support art. And when you get those people together, you're going to find different sets of concerns and different sets of know-how when it comes to making art things happen. And there's no way to know what you're going to discover, and the only thing to do is to find those juicy juxtapositions, which means, advertise your new music concerts in the art department. Try and get people that you would never think might enjoy new music to show up, because you don't know what's going to happen. Do you guys have any thought about the juicy juxtaposition thought?
I think maybe, so when you say that you're juxtaposing music with art, that does not seem that far-fetched to me. Well, and I think that's almost kind of a facile example. Like, what I don't know if that's really reaching out very much, and I feel like there's a pretty limited amount of community just among the new music audience already. It seems to me that the community that we have is not really made up of anybody who is just an audience member, right? It seems like we're pretty much just a lot of times making stuff for one another.
Yeah, we go to each other's concerts.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel I like this discussion about community. I just feel like it happens so much. That's all we hear about in new music. Like,
yes.
Keep breeding the community or keep your community. Like, there's no other discussion. Like, what is the other topic we can talk about that is just as important as community? Is there one, or do we just have to keep talking about relationships between people?
I think
for the rest of the time?
when people talk about community, they're doing it instead of talking about the standard things. Like, we want to form a community. We don't want to build an audience. So I think saying community, even though we seem to be saturated with it, is the other thing.
So I think the larger organizations kind of also think about building an audience as a community to a certain extent too. Actually, I know they do.
Well,
they
I don't necessarily
want to present an inclusive environment where their audience members do feel like they're a part of something. So I feel like maybe it's kind of the same thing, but maybe they're just using different terms.
Well, here, I would say this, that a lot of people in the new music business, what they really want to do is build their audience, and they wrap it up in terms saying things like build a community, but that's not really what they're trying to do. I think it's the sort of verbiage of the moment to talk about building a community, but I don't necessarily think that's what a lot of places are doing, even though they claim to in their ad materials or whatever.
So what I don't understand maybe is what the community once built looks like. What is this community? Because to me, reading through this article and articles like it about community strike me as kind of this hand-wavy TED Talk BS that is like just these weird, fluffy, big ideas that don't actually mean anything practical to me. Like, what are you talking about when you're talking about a community?
That's a good question.
I think my takeaway from this article of like one big example of like a larger community is like this network that many of us are a part of like how we share article. Like we in our little SoundNotion community get to learn about all the different things that are happening in the new music world and how it intersects with other things in the art world and stuff. And we do that from sharing these articles with each other. We have a space where we talk about it in our little SoundNotion chat, and we were able to help connect other arts. Like in theory, maybe somebody has actually gone to a show from hearing about some artist on our show or something like that.
Well, I know that they have.
Yeah,
I love the idea of growing, like, for let's take us, growing our community. Let's say this podcast, but at the crux of it, I just want more people to listen to the podcast. And I want the podcast to get bigger. Like, I mean, that's what I want for it. I want more people to listen to it. And I think that's what everyone wants. But, like, the way we talk about it, like community, self-sustainability, it's like, I don't know. I kind of agree with you, Dave. Like, I don't quite know what that means.
This article could be the placeholder text in the teleprompter at TED conferences everywhere.
Yes,
right.
Which is kind of why I wanted to talk about it, because on the one hand it is, a lot of fluff and circumstance, but I think trying to build community, and let me be clear that when I think about my thinking about this is completely focused through running a collegiate composition studio and doing concerts and performances out of that, and having the studio connect with other arts-based organizations or perhaps community service-based organizations or whatever, making some kind of meaningful connections in the community to help foster interest and attendance at art events.
Yeah. So I think the community, that the word you just used implies like the people that live near you and that might come to the show and stuff like that.
Well, it talks about that, but the article also talks about your digital community, if you will.
Yeah. So I meant like the way you just used that word is like the people that might be able to be patrons of the concert. And the other use of community in this article is like the people that would help connect and have conversations about this stuff to build the industry as a whole in little corners and stuff.
Here's something I wanted to find out what the composers think. It talks about audience.
Do you know any?
It talks about audience-centered design. Yeah. To me, that's an interesting idea because in the article makes the point of pointing this out, where like if you're trying to figure out how to give a presentation of any kind of art that has some meaningful connection to the community and to the audience members, that speaks to them in some kind of meaningful way, is absorbable in a meaningful way. It's almost like new music either passively or even sometimes actively tries to avoid those things, at least seemingly. Imagine the composer writing whatever he or she wants. They're not considering how it works with an audience like that, or at least typically. But then it becomes the question about do you cater to an audience, and if that's bad, and can you try and make something that functions that way? Is thinking about the audience in that way and how your piece can work in a community building effort like something that is or isn't worthwhile to think about as a composer, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I liked reading about that too, and they framed it where there's kind of two approaches of like the crazy inconsiderate composer just doing something completely new and trying to get the audience there, which is a huge leap, versus the composer who like knows the people they're writing for and trying to bring them a little bit further. and like just stretching the context that they know with whatever music they're familiar with, just stretching it a little bit further, like doing an idea that's just a little bit outside of what they know, but and still interesting music and something they might like to listen to.
Well, and to me that strikes it the way we should really be thinking about building the community, and well, because reading all this stuff about community and all these things that that this article, and we should identify the author is I don't know how to say his or her name. I'm going to go with her. Shea Leon is how I'm going to go. So I apologize to who, him or her. But anyway, what? Don't laugh at me. So we have a community. The problem is that it's small and insular, right?
Well, so
we
that's
have
the
a
thing.
community.
That's
Yes.
the fact that it is small and insular. I wonder if that actually is, it sounds nice. Everyone's like can sing "Kumbaya" together, but the thrill of having like a larger than life guest artist perform with if that can't exist in a small community because everyone like just knows each other and is going to hang out. Like you wouldn't sell tickets on like look at this freaking superstar come. Like that's not part of the community.
Well, so what I'm saying is we've got a community, and what we need to figure out is how to bring new people into the community, and that's to me the thing that is left out here, and that is I think different about making a technology product is that when it seems to me that when you're creating a new technology product, you're starting a community from scratch, and I don't think we're starting from scratch. I think we're starting from having this community of even if literally nobody is listening to this, thank you for listening. Even if literally nobody is listening to this, there is a community that exists that includes at least the 4 of us panelists, right? And we are publishing this in the hopes that there will be other people that listen to it and join the community. And maybe when I say you can follow us on SoundNotion on Twitter, that somebody will do that or something like that. And I don't know how part of a community that makes somebody, but hopefully...
Right. If you are just an observer, are you part of the community?
That's called an audience member.
Right.
And that is a very isolated experience, right? When you go to see a concert, that you're there in a room with a bunch of other people, but
you're not involved with the creation of anything.
Even if you go with a friend, like if Sam and I go to a concert, we're going to go to the concert and sit next to each other and watch the concert and each have our own experience of the concert. And then we might leave and maybe discuss that experience of the concert. But the concert experience itself is not a group activity. Yeah. It just happens to be that we're all doing it in the same place. It is a very isolated and isolating activity.
Yeah, well, that's also because of the nature of the art, too.
Yeah.
Sure, but that's not any different than film. When I go to a movie,
but it is different.
I can go see a movie.
Very true. Very true. But it is different than like visual art. Going to a museum with a group of friends or something.
Side note: have you guys seen Ex Machina? Because I kind of want to see it.
No.
I've seen all the trailers. It looks good.
Community project. Let's go do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's become a part of that community.
Yeah. You think they'll let us like bring our phones and be on Hangouts the whole time while we're in the movie theater? Of course not. That's insane.
Yeah. Well, I think that there could be a difference between.
Well, remember the tweet seats?
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
boy.
Exactly.
I think that there could be a difference between just merely an audience member and a member of the community experiencing something that was in some way a community effort, right? Mm-hmm. So imagine the difference. So imagine like a project I'm considering. Imagine a concert where it's young players from local high schools playing pieces written by collegiate composers as etudes for them. So it's like introducing younger players to a controllable, modulated amount of weirdness of new music. So it teaches them something about the way contemporary music works, but it's not so hard they can't play it, and it's not so weird their parents will absolutely hate it, you know? So when you have that concert, then you have the parents who drove the kids to the rehearsals, you have the kids who learned the music, you have the composers who wrote the music, and you have all the family members who are going to go and see those kids perform that concert. If those people get into what you're doing and want to look at other projects that you might do going forward, does that make them into a community member? Are they a member of my community now?
Well, I think it certainly has the potential to. My concern with projects like that is that you are talking about a fundamentally different thing, right? You are building a community not around the other thing that we're doing, but around something else, around this project of you know, what about music that's not accessible? What about music that's not playable by high school players?
I know. I'm getting into that. So that's
like
a way to.
If we encourage people to get up and dance in the middle of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra concert, which could be really interesting, is not going to be the same experience. That we're now creating a different community around a different idea and a different art form.
Right.
And also, I want to see people dancing to Strauss tone poems.
Obviously. I mean, that's the goal of all our work, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think that calls into the point you're getting at, Dave, was one of the primary thoughts I had when reading about that, is that composers, I think, need to have at least in my view, it would be helpful for composers to have a more wide-angle view of what it is their job is. Mm-hmm. And we all know the composers who go to school and they keep their head down and they write pieces and they want that to be all they have to do, you know? And for some of them, I guess, that's the way it'll play out, but for most of them, it won't. And if they're going to self-promote and try and, you know, even if you're doing it in the most selfish, self-serving way possible, developing a community of people that love your music is good for you, right? I guess they might be called a fan base in that case. Yeah. So as a composer, should you always write music that just tries to satisfy you, or should you write, what's that German word for music for use, Dave, like Hindemith talked about? You know, in other words, write useful music that serves the community in some way. Couple of studio concerts ago, we had a Hindemith violin and clarinet duet. But Hindemith, who was Hindemith with a capital H when he wrote this, you know, he was not just, you know, getting out of graduate school Hindemith or whatever. He wrote this violin clarinet duet, which is not huge, but it's not an insubstantial piece. He wrote it for the opening of a municipal gymnasium in some town in Germany, you know. And he wrote it with connections to the local community in mind. In other words, he considered his responsibility as a composer to not just write, you know, his big orchestral pieces that are dense and have everything that you'd expect out of a big, dense Hindemith piece, but also write this 5-minute cool violin and clarinet duet because it's a useful thing to do for that community.
So that was very much a functional piece of music.
Yes.
Specifically, yeah.
And I don't think, certainly in my experience, composers aren't encouraged to behave that way while they're in school.
But when was the last time, first of all, when was the last time you even were aware of the opening of a gymnasium in your neighborhood?
Well, you got to remember, the opening of a municipal
When was the last time a gymnasium opening commissioned a string quartet? Like, that's not a thing. This is.
Are you going to let me answer the question, or are you just going to keep talking?
Those were hypothetical or rhetorical questions. They weren't necessarily intended to be answered, but if you'd like to answer them,
so you were just grandstanding, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Also, the word you were looking for is Gebrauchtmusik.
Yeah, Gebrauchtmusik.
The opening of the 25th anniversary of the High School of Music and Art in New York City. That was 1 minute.
The High School of Music and Art is a different sort of thing than your local gymnasium.
Wow,
but
you Dr. Naismith.
Well, that was his local gymnasium.
The opening of a municipal gymnasium in the middle of the previous century would have been a bigger deal than it is now.
That was where the whole community got together.
And they had a hootenanny and a barn raising.
That's right.
Like, what is the 2015 equivalent of the barn raising hootenanny gymnasium Dr. Naismith opening?
Additionally, if that was a gymnasium in Germany, then that is a high school, right?
I don't know. Anyway. But think about it in these terms. Like, something that actively, and I would say as a part of pre-compositional thought even, thinks about how to engage the community. Yeah. Thinks about how to have a meaningful connection with a community, be it virtual or physical, or, as is almost always the case these days, an amalgamation of virtual and physical, right? Is that something that's worthwhile trying to get student composers to wrap their heads around when they're in school?
Should I commission a work for the launch of the new version of my website? Is that what you're saying? Should Facebook commission a new string quartet for the next major update to Facebook?
No.
Yes. Yes. God, yes.
Well, yeah,
awesome
they
would
probably
that
should.
That really doesn't fit Facebook's aesthetic, though.
Should the local spoken word collective reach out to a composer and talk about doing a collaborative work with spoken word and music? Something like that.
I'll tell you what Facebook would do, though. Facebook would sponsor like a big, like, be a major sponsor of a big pop concert or festival or something like that.
Mm.
They'd probably get behind something like that. The big corporations love to do things like that.
Hmm.
They
It
probably
would get made
wouldn't
fun
do
of
it.
ruthlessly if Facebook were sponsoring it, though.
Bank of America is a big supporter of Carnegie Hall.
Mm-hmm.
Credit Suisse is, I think, like, big on New York Philharmonic. I don't know why
your critiques of what I'm saying, Dave, are focused around like abstract things like you launching a website or gigantic, not scalable things like Facebook. I'm talking about building out a community from you and the people around you, not Facebook.
Well, then I don't know. So what is, if it's not Facebook, what's this community look like then? I keep coming back to this. I don't know the most basic thing about what you're talking about, building a community. I don't know what you mean by a community, and I don't know what a built community looks like.
Is the community completely self-sustaining? Like would they need outside funds or outside influence to operate, or would it be everyone who attends and who creates is able to keep a functioning system alive?
I think that would be you'd have to determine that on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
It depends on the scale of and the focus of or the purpose of whatever the community is.
Right, and I think the way the author of this article is talking about community isn't necessarily something that's a function-specific, like money-making thing or anything. It's just like
Right.
a group of people that share something and do it in a in a habit-forming kind of way.
Well, I think a lot of these discussions at the heart of it really do come down to, geez, I want to make a living playing new music. I want to get paid to do it, and I want to be able to afford my rent. Like, I think when they say community, they're not just saying like, oh, we need more friends for our social time, but more like, I need this to be my life, and I need to do 40 hours a week doing it or more.
And I think the author of this article suggests that, and she uses intersection as another big heading in the article, that the intersection of these different groups of friends or different circles, the different communities that you have, that's really a source of great success in helping people like us make money at what we do.
Or it can be.
Yeah, it can be, right.
I think to answer your gripe, Dave, a community I think is more than a group. It's a group of people who are engaged enough with whatever is going on that they commit service and consider it their responsibility to proactively do something involved with community activity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's. I don't want to think of it as cynically as Patrick is, because I think what Patrick's saying is.
But you're going to manage
going
somehow.
too far. No. I'm saying I think Patrick has gone too far in the cynical direction, because I do think there is more artistic value when the community feels some sense of ownership, when the people that are listening to your music want to stick around and talk to you after the concert, and not just you saying, hey, come and talk to me, but they want to talk to you before you tell them that. And or I don't know, maybe they didn't realize they wanted to talk to you until you said that. Maybe that's why people say that. But I think that there is some value to doing this, and certainly to thinking about it, but I'm kind of, I guess the big gripe that I have is that we always talk about it in these abstract terms, and we never talk about this is a thing that you should do, here is why you should do it, and here are the results that you should look for, and these are the measurable outcomes of trying these things, and that will lead you to tweak the things that you are trying to build a community, whatever that means. And this is what the community could look like. It doesn't necessarily even need to say this is what the community does look like or will look like, but this is what it could look like, so that there is some semblance of a goal other than there's this word that sounds good on friggin' Sesame Street. Like,
I agree
that's
with that
the part of it
100%.
that I'm really tired of.
I agree with that 100%. I think that the article overall addresses, it's almost like forces at play that can be harnessed to make something happen, but when you get to a specific instance of some community either realized or potential, talking about it and saying what it is, what it looks like, how it functions is incredibly case by case, and there's no way to talk about them in overall terms other than the things involved in making that community whatever they might be. And these, it's like a rundown of a lot of things that the author thinks are helpful in doing that.
Mm-hmm. And you can hear more at Sam's TEDx North Alabama talk in 2016.
And anyway, that's why I tried to filter it, my thinking about it, and I was trying to talk about it through, like, how do I think about this and how am I actually working on it myself, you know? Because it's not, there's not a lot to talk about. There's not enough there unless you apply it onto a real situation.
Well, and that's why people are going to have to come to your TEDx talk in 2016.
It's hard.
You gotta go to Florence, Alabama, to hear Sam's TEDx talk in 2016.
It'll be held at a
Florence,
municipal
Alabama,
building.
North Alabama TEDx North Alabama. That's the thing. I just invented it.
I just want to note that we got all the way through that segment without Dave and I screaming at each other. So, win.
That's because we are growing as a community.
It's a Dave and Sam community, exactly.
Right.
Yes.
We're maturing as a community, and that is where we're going to leave it for this week.
Yes.
We have matured as a SoundNotion panelist community. And if you would like to read more about our community or participate in our community, you can do that on our site, soundnotion.tv/SN, and you can find links to the things that we talked about today, including the article that we were talking about for most of the show today at soundnotion.tv/SN. You can follow us on Twitter. We are at SoundNotion on Twitter. We're also all individually on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on Tumblr. But you can also leave us a review in the iTunes store. That always helps people find us. Leave us a good review. If you don't like the show, then don't leave a review. But if you really like the show, leave us like a 5-star review. Or you know what? If you don't like the show, leave us a 5-star review and then write in the comment why you don't like us. That would be, because then we'll read it.
It'll also give us a chance to bring you into the community.
Yes, that's another way to participate in the growing SoundNotion community.
Hey, Dave, since we've broken your closing monologue stride, we need to go ahead and mention that the music world says goodbye to B.B. King this week.
Lost a giant.
Yes.
A couple of weeks ago now, as we're recording this, in B.B. King. Very sad.
Yes.
And I subjected many of my students to B.B. King, and I was very sad that only about 2/3 of them knew who he was. So, you know, play some B.B. King for the younger people in your life so that they
only
know
2/3 of
what
them knew
blues
who he
guitar
was?
sounds like. Yeah.
Wow. Because he's like the...
I showed my students a picture of the Beatles and asked them who they were, and I got, I swear to you, they said Paul McCartney and Jason Lennon. This is a real thing that happened in class this week. So B.B. King is a stretch. So we need to build the B.B. King blues guitar community to include younger members.
I think there is one.
I don't know.
Exactly.
If there is, it doesn't include many people in my community. So
we
that's
need
going to do
to
it.
cause these communities of your students and the B.B. King circle to intersect, perhaps.
Right, and if you have thoughts on how we can build a community, tell us by leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. You can find more information about us at soundnotion.tv/SN, and I'm not going to repeat myself anymore. Thank you so much for watching or listening, and we'll see you back next week.
BB King.
I was going to say community.
I've got proof that there's a strong BB King community. I typed in BB Kempf, and it still came up with the right thing.
Yeah.